do want to pick up on the thread we were talking about just before we went to the break. If there is forgiveness, and the story of the prodigal son is about forgiveness.
Yeah.
There's no doubt. And the question I had was, what further lesson can we take from this? Certainly, Jesus forgives us all, and that's what the parable of prodigal son was all about. But there's other things to consider. What message does that send to honest people then? That honesty and hard work have no real place, because you can be forgiven and restored to your position no matter how badly you screw up. Because that gets me to the dark side of my brain working. Well, if there's forgiveness for everything, why don't I rob a bank or something like that, because I'm going to be forgiven.
Well,
grace. All right. I love grace.
And if you think about that, it really upsets the social order of things. That if you can have someone who's really messed things up, and if we're going to rehabilitate them back into society, then to your point, well, then what's the purpose? Why? What difference does it make if I do all these things? But I mean, I think that
what are the consequences of bad behavior or sin, or what? How does the Presbyterian Church describe sin?
Well, I'll answer that, but then also I want to get at even the question beforehand. But so I think to your question about what we talk about sin is any time that we are not doing God's will. And that can be through our actions, that can be through our inactions, that can be through our thoughts, that can be through our words. I mean, we can sin in a whole lot of ways. We can do nothing and still be sinning, which is pretty incredible to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know how that can be.
James chapter 4.
All right.
I believe it's James 4:17 that says, anyone who knows the good they ought to do and does not do it is sinning. And so in that instance, if we stand by idle, fully aware of injustice that is happening, and if we do nothing to stop it, we in some way, shape, or form are accountable for that.
So if I go to a larger city and there's a bunch of protesters out there busting car windows and setting fires, I should take a baseball bat to them, or I'm a sinner, or what?
Well, I'd
like to take the baseball bat. I'm getting a little old for that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know if that's what the proper response to stopping those riots would be.
But what would be the proper response?
Well, I think maybe having conversations with people while they're not in the middle of rioting.
So we should just walk by the riot.
Well, I think, I mean, what's the alternative? I mean, you go out there.
The baseball bat.
Yeah. Either that, or, you could stand out there without a baseball bat and say, hey, please stop rioting right now.
That'd work.
But a whole lot of good that's going to do. So that's not really going to help. I think that's an instance where you look to have conversations and kind of meet people where they are in a time and venue when it's most likely to do something.
Okay.
But I think the doing nothing is, okay, I sit in my house with the doors locked while the riot is going on. And then the next day when the riots are done, I still just sit in my house and I don't do anything. I think that's when we move from self-preservation to actually inaction. And I think,
but weren't we inactive during the riot?
Yeah, but I think to some degree you can look at that and say, like, I don't know what any sort of meaningful, helpful response would be in that moment.
Self-preservation.
Yeah.
Or the preservation of property or even life.
Yeah. Well, I mean, certainly.
The rioters will not be deterred by complete inaction.
Yeah.
I mean, they will continue as long as you let them.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's where you've got to have law enforcement. I think that's also where, if it's one thing, if the riot is happening outside and then there's just a commotion, okay.
Well, let me just give you a quick example. The mayor of Portland, Ted Wheeler, has let the destruction of his city go forward.
And that, I would say, is abdication.
I'd say that's serious abdication.
Because he has the power to do something about it.
The murder rate in Portland so far this year has increased. Are you ready? 540%. 540%.
I don't doubt it. I think it's been similar in New York City too.
Well, Chicago certainly.
Yeah, I think it's like a fourfold increase in New York City.
Because the mayors have pulled back law enforcement and said, okay, we're going to, solve this peacefully, and peace, love, dope. And, let's sit in the lotus position with incense on and listen to a sitar or some damn thing.
Well, but so that's an instance where I think for those leaders, that is an abdication of their responsibility because they have the ability to do something about it. The person sitting in their home while the riot is happening outside, I don't really think is in a position to do anything about it. So that's where if you know the good that you ought to do, if you're in a position to do something about it, then do it. That's how I would interpret that in Scripture.
Well, I'll give you a story from my own, shady past and my degenerate youth. And I was drunk and disorderly and was thrown in jail.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that had a greater degree of behavior modification than anything I ever heard in church. Because I got thrown in a cell, and it was unpleasant.
Yeah.
It was unpleasant. And the jailers didn't even act like my mom,
Mm-hmm.
They were pretty rough characters.
Yeah.
But that apparently was the message that God gave me.
Yeah.
Because it started me on a different path.
Completely.
It did.
I think kind of like the prodigal in the story.
Yes.
I think that moment for the prodigal, it was when he was envious of the pigs rolling in their own filth for how hungry he was, wanting to eat pig food. That was his moment, stuck in a jail cell that night. And that was a moment where he thought, gee, this way of life isn't really working out for me. I need to make some different choices moving forward.
What was great about being in jail, they turned out the lights. And there I sat by myself in the cell with all night to think.
Yeah.
And it occurred to me that I'd gotten myself there.
Exactly. And so I think that's where there are natural consequences for our actions, certainly. But now imagine if when you had that change of heart in that jail cell, and then if you wanted to re-enter society, but everyone said, well, you're a criminal and we don't want to be around you. We don't want to give you gainful employment. We don't want to help you in your rehabilitation. You might as well just go back to jail because, those are the choices you made. You should just rot there.
Well, I've told this story several times, but there was something else that encouraged me to change my ways and to really reevaluate my life and what I was doing. I was arrested and taken to the Blackhawk County Jail, and they let me call my dad.
Mm-hmm.
And the listeners have heard this story many times. They've heard all my stories. But anyway, I called my dad. It was late at night, and I said, Dad, I'm down here in jail in Blackhawk County in Waterloo. He said, what'd you do? Well, I got drunk. And he said, oh, that's all right, son. I'll help you out. I was young too, and you don't know how to drink yet.
Yeah.
All this, can't handle your liquor. And he said, how much is it going to take to get you out? And I said, $107 or something like that, 105. And he just jumped because that was a lot of money in 1970.
Sure. Yeah.
And he said, well, gee, did you do anything else? And I said, well, yes, public drunkenness and resisting arrest. I took a swing at a police officer, and I heard this sound. Click. It was the loudest sound I've ever heard.
Wow, yeah. Silence had never been so loud
and
before.
Off to the can I went. You
Yeah.
know? I think the police would have let me out if they would have got a promise to pay, but no.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they were all smiling when
they saw it. Yeah.
Right this way.
Exactly. We've got a space ready here with your name on it.
Anyway.
Yeah.
That was my father's response to the story of the prodigal son, more or less.
But I think as you had gone through that and returned home, saying, wow, Dad, I really learned, when I had to spend...
I didn't say that I whined like a baby, but anyway.
Yeah. I spent such and such amount of time in jail, and my goodness, I don't want to make those choices again. I think that's where that forgiveness comes in. And I think even with that forgiveness, this older brother still thought that the younger brother, I guess, hadn't paid his dues enough or whatever else. And that's where I think Jesus is challenging those of us who've never been to jail to think through, okay, well, how much is enough? Or what expectations do you have for someone who's done their time or reaped what they've sown? Mm-hmm. At what point do you stop holding that over someone and say, okay, let's move forward together? And I think that's what we are seeing in our society right now. We see people, we've talked about this before, but I mean, how people are being canceled over things that they did or didn't do or say or didn't say 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And, as if we have the corner on morality. And yet every one of us has been in that situation at some time in our lives.
Yeah. Would you recommend then the forgiveness of the prodigal son, the father's prodigal son, in the biblical story, or would you take my dad's route, do you think? Because I'll tell you something. We never spoke of it. He's gone now. He's been gone for several years. But I went home the weekend, and he said, "Hi, son," But
Interesting.
We never talked about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know, like if it were, say, one of my kids in that situation and, say that $105 or $505 or, something like that. I don't know if I would pay to get them out. It would depend on how long they would be in there for. Now, I would help them in their rehabilitation afterward. I think so.
All right, we're going to go to the phones. AM 1400 KVFD. Good afternoon. You're on the air with Pastor Hill.
Hey, how you guys doing today?
We're all right.
Pretty good discussion going on. I just kind of wanted to know if I could throw something in there along with that.
Sure.
His analogy of inactivity also being a sin, and using a riot made it kind of difficult, simply because it's pretty hard to go out and walk out in front of 2,000 people that are tearing the town apart and say you shouldn't do that. But let's use this analogy. What if you're on a street late at night and you see some guy attacking a woman or even a guy and just beating the living crap out of him, and you stand there and do nothing, or do you try and stop him and help it? That, to me,
I think that's a perfect example. And I would say, in the society that we are in, the good news is, even if you don't feel equipped to stop that crime yourself, almost every one of us has a cell phone, and you can use it. You can call the authorities and have them come and help back you up as well. But I think that's where your lack of intervention really can make all the difference. And my interpretation would be that's the kind of thing that James 4 is talking about. Whereas in the riot, to your point, if you get out in the street when there's a few thousand people, all you're doing is sacrificing yourself for no real gain for anything.
Right. Well, and then the other thing is with the prodigal son, I think it just shows that regardless of the life he's lived, that he's repented, and his father still loved him, even though that he had done these things. Had he not repented, I think it would have been a different story. But he came home and said, "Forgive me for what I've done," and that's what we're supposed to do with Christ and with God. So that's my take on it anyway.
No, your take is very welcome, as is everyone's, really. Pastor Hill and I start talking, and I forget to ask for callers. I do it quite a bit, but no, that's a point well taken. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that really is true, that that the prodigal son, the younger brother, comes home, and the whole story wouldn't take place if that son had never decided to come home. But what I love also so much about the response of that father is that he runs out to meet that son before he's even heard a word that the son is going to say. For all that father knows, maybe the son has come all the way back just to give him a punch across the face and say, "You did this to me because you gave me your inheritance, and look how I ended up." Of course, that's not how the story goes. But what we see in both instances with the younger son and the older son is that the father goes to meet both of them before they even utter a word. The older brother, for example, while he's moping out in the field, still doing his work and thinking he's a martyr while everyone else is celebrating, the father goes out and meets him, trying to invite him, to draw him back into the celebration. But the difference is the younger son actually is repentant. The older son still can't get out of his mind how undeserving the younger brother is, but he has not and is not able to admit his own need for repentance or need for grace from his father. He still just feels self-satisfied, self-justified. And I think that's the posture in those religious leaders that Jesus was trying to correct in the telling of that story.
That's probably true. But, of course, what we seek to do on this program is to see how these biblical stories connect with the wider world,
Yeah.
and how it relates to our own lives.
Yeah.
Again, I looking back on the incident of my life I was describing, I got a lot out of it.
Yeah.
I really did. It was a very embarrassing moment, and I'm glad I'm this age now so I can talk about my 18-year-old self.
Yeah.
But I learned a hard lesson, but I learned a more profound lesson, I think. And my dad even mentioned it to me a few times as I got older. Well, you're a man now, and you get to make your own choices.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those choices are going to be good, some are going to be bad, but they're going to be yours.
Yeah.
And I think the way he looked at me, he kind of looked at me like, don't call me at midnight.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And just this idea that even with forgiveness, there are still consequences with our actions. And I think your critique at the middle of the hour about, well, if we just have this grace, then what difference does it make with how I live? I think that's kind of like me saying, well, some people can smoke their entire lives and not get lung cancer, or, some people can eat whatever they want and not have heart issues. So I'm just going to smoke and drink and eat and whatever. And, because I'll probably be okay. And it's like, well, yeah, you might, but you also might not. And doing all those things will likely increase the chance of having negative consequences from those choices. And yeah, you might get off scot-free and you'd be okay. But at the end of the day, there are still consequences for our choices and our behaviors, even if we are forgiven, even if we do receive grace. And so that's where I look at, sure, you could just go and sin and whatever, and God will forgive you, but you might have some of those late night phone calls from jail with no one answering, the phone as you do it.
Well, I never tried it again. Put it that way.
Yeah, that one time was enough.
That one time, it was enough of a lesson.
Yeah.
It really was. I didn't like to hear it at the time, and the cops were all laughing at me.
Yeah, they probably loved
they
it.
escorted me down the hallway because I was a mouthy kid. I know that surprises you.
No, you were probably the highlight of their week. That'd be my guess.
I don't know. Blackhawk County in those days, they had a lot of characters like me.
Yeah. Probably just another day, another dollar.
We were the baby boom generation. We just thought we were cool, and we'd smoke dope and drink a lot of liquor, and we were entitled and blah, blah, blah. Oh, gosh. And I was hardly the only one like that. We were just young people.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, I looked at my job as a parent as guiding, and my parents kind of felt this way too. Guiding my child through his teenage years and young adult years, so he or she wouldn't really get hurt.
Yeah.
That's really the way my parents felt.
Yeah.
They just assumed I'd start smoking. They just assumed I'd start drinking coffee soon and drinking.
Mm-hmm.
So they were trying to teach me moderation. Of course, I never learned it. Moderation. What?
Try to help you make it through alive.
Yeah, that was it, and that was the attitude at the time. Pastor Hill, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
3:00, the news is next.